Dr. Jones. All right, so this one that we just took today deals with Dr. Jones. And let me actually share my screen here. Let's do screen sharing. Let's see how I can...
Push too hard, I dare you.
Let's do add a tab. Let's have this one. There we go. All right, so we should be able to see this here. All right, fantastic. All right, can I have everybody's attention? Thank you. We are 37 minutes into our review here. And we're looking at the example here of Dr. Jones. Can I have somebody read the scenario right here that has the reading in front of them? Maybe actually, Nathan, would you mind reading about Dr. Jones?
Sure.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Dr. Jones is doing a formal research study of the effect of mental imagery on memory. She randomly assigned students in the psychology course she was teaching into two groups and required them to complete the task as part of the coursework. 40 students were in each group. Each group was presented the same list of 30 word pairs, e.g. tree/book, house/street, friend/cat. Group A was told to form a mental image for each pair. Group B was not given instructions. Each group was given 2 minutes to memorize the pairs of words. Dr. Jones then tested their recall of the list by giving each group the first word and asking them to remember the second word. Dr. Jones reported the number of words recalled by each group and then debriefed the participants. The results are presented in the table below.
Excellent. Thank you. So the first thing is identify the independent variable presented in the study. Again, independent means that it is the thing that is being manipulated, because the dependent relies on the independent. Welcome. You can grab your example up here on the table. Riley, your example on the table you can look at. Should have your name on it. Welcome, Arthur. So what would have been unacceptable is if you said the independent variable is the students.
Oh.
Okay? That would have been unacceptable.
Oh, unacceptable.
Because that's not true. What would have been, is everybody with us? If you're at the review, you need to be focusing, please. Thank you. Otherwise, I can't process. What would have been the independent variable according to you? Thank you, Sam.
I put that it would be the instruction received, like the amount of instruction received.
Oh, that's
Okay.
a better way for it. I said it was like the method of memorizing.
What did I say?
If you had anything that had to do with mental imagery or mental image, that would have gotten a point. Okay? So, right now, okay, nobody should be talking while Mr. Maloney is. Thank you. What I want you to do is put a little +1 if you put something about mental image. It doesn't have to go any more than that. If you put, students being told to form a mental image, that would have worked as well. Okay, any questions on that one? Excellent. The next one, and again, it didn't say explain, just said identify. The next one says identify the control group. What would have worked for that one? Identify the control group. Which one was the control group?
Group B.
If you said the control group is group A, would that have worked? No, because that would be incorrect. Okay? The control group is group B would have worked, or the control group is a group not being told to form a mental image. Okay? So if you would have put either of those answers, that would have worked. Give yourself a +1 if you put something like that. Next one. So we have right here, online that this one is acceptable examples. This one right here is unacceptable. Same with this one is acceptable right here. And this one is unacceptable. Let's look at the third question, which was explain why a type of research design being used is appropriate for the study. So research design, okay? Unacceptable would have been the study was appropriate because the researcher used double-blind techniques. Is that true? No, it is not. So that would have been unacceptable, okay? What would have been acceptable?
I mean, that was a random assignment. That was a random assignment.
Yeah, I saw random.
I saw random assignments too.
I talked about random assignment as well.
I talked about random assignment and
I said that control group too.
So a lot of you put random assignment. A couple of the answers could have been this. The example research design that shows a cause and effect relationship is an experiment. So that is why the researcher chose this. So if you mention something about cause and effect relationship, because again, remember, if you're making a correlation study, if you're saying that, if you're studying something in an experiment, let's make sure we're listening while Mr. Momi's talking. If we are doing an experiment on rats and then we correlate that to humans,
That's stupid.
if you do a study and correlate that to humans, correlation does not necessarily mean what? Causation, exactly. So this relationship right here does show cause and effect, this experiment, but if it was a correlation study, it couldn't have shown that. This design uses the experimental method because you can manipulate one variable to affect another. Okay? So if you explain, okay, about research, then that works right there. If you would have mentioned something like double blind, that wouldn't have worked. Questions? Yes, sir.
I answered a little bit differently, so mine's in a little bit of a gray area, so I'm not sure if this
Okay.
point on. What I said was what I remembered from when it said what type of experiment. I remembered that there was the observational type of experiment, just observing behavior. So I said because it's not that kind of experiment, it is a more of a controlled experiment where he can control confounding variables and just test one variable. Then he's able, she is able to get the answer that she desires by controlling all the different confounding variables in this controlled environment.
Since this one was, you're right, this one was a gray area question. It wasn't just like, hey, you got this or not. I feel like that would have explained it enough, right? And again, if you're not 100% sure on the exact wordage, give a little bit more, okay? So that hopefully you kind of hit it somewhere, okay? So it's okay to give a few sentences long. Don't feel like, oh, I have to get it just one sentence and make it super polished. Ladies and gentlemen, is this a final draft that you're answering? No. Okay, it's a rough draft, and they know that. So if you provide enough to show that you know what you're talking about, hey, great. Excellent. Any other questions on that one? Number 3? Let's jump to number 4 here. Explain what the different standard deviations indicate about the data from the two groups. Yes.
My answer was this one was confusing how the standard deviations work. So I'm not sure if this is correct or not. This is yours. My explanation of the standard deviations was that the standard deviations said that proved that the group A was provided more consistent results than group B did. So group A would consistently answer within these parameters. So they showed that the advice that they got from mental images consistently gave them that assistance that they needed.
Good. Is group A or B better.
Group A, because it's closer to the, like, the mean, the average on the standard.
Mm-hmm.
That's like what I said.
I almost
Four
just said
standard,
average, but I thought
or
that was
four z-scores away, is that how you say it? Or four standard deviations away?
What
Um,
is it the same? Okay.
I don't remember that. I
It is the same, I remember z-score.
It was a thing. I just don't remember what it is.
Yeah, I don't remember what a z-score is, I just like to use it now. She's like, it'll look nice.
So you're right here, where if you would have put the standard deviations were different because Group A had more scores than Group B, that wouldn't have been good, okay? But if you would have put something like either the standard deviation from Group B is higher than Group A, so the scores in Group B are more different from each other than those in Group A, that would have gotten it. Or Group A had scores that were more similar to each other than Group B. Okay, so the difference between would have been less strong. Any other questions on standard deviation? Because we've seen that twice so far on.
Like the 72, or 77.
You would only.
96.9.
Yeah, you would only need, and we actually kind of went over that just a little bit today. The 68% and 95% and the 99.99%. Really, you only need to know that for 1 or 2 multiple choice questions out of 100.
But do they give you the draft?
Usually they do.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then that's different.
Yeah. All right, and then our favorite part, which is ethical flaw. Explain an ethical flaw that is explicitly presented in this scenario. An example that would not have worked for an ethical flaw is the researcher needed to guarantee that no human would come to the students in this study.
Wait, I'm
Oh, sorry. No, let me read this one more
They
time.
were forced to do the study, right? Isn't
Okay.
that
They have no consent.
Okay.
Oh, why did I not see that? I was like, ethical flaw, she's just asking.
Did you not put anything?
I didn't see it.
Hey.
Oh. Where's the pizza?
Victoria has it.
I said it in the first.
You guys
Nice.
upper period? Hey.
They're like, she's got it. Hey, guys.
Well done. Well done.
Why didn't you say
Thank you. Do you have a receipt for me too?
No? Do you need a receipt?
We went while our pizza was getting cooked.
Getting,
Getting,
we didn't use your credit card.
yeah.
I promise.
No, but do you have a receipt from the pizza?
No.
I forgot to
we're
ask
supposed
you.
get one?
It's okay.
Why? Are you a receipt kind of guy?
No, because I actually get paid by the school for snacks. You guys think that I just give you snacks out of my bank account?
If you have like your bank account on your app, I mean like as an app,
I have my bank
you
account.
can screenshot your like
It's true.
transactions.
It's
You
true.
didn't tell
It's true.
us.
It's okay. It's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
No, I'm not that nice. I used to.
I literally thought you were just that nice. I was like, oh, I'm
No, I used to. I used to do that, and then I was like, forget that.
Why do that when someone else can pay for it?
Exactly. Yeah. Writes everything off. All right.
Box tickets for the Clippers and the company bought them. I felt so bad. I was like, because you were like, oh.
If you go to the Clippers and just wear the company logo of your shirt, you can consider it advertising and you can write it off.
No, we went there and we got like free tour because they said, oh, well, our company's gonna buy like the box tickets to like as a do as our
Yeah.
I just don't know how we got to go for free and then we got like free tour because it was a company.
That's awesome.
It was the year coach had now, so we bought it and then we said NBA got it. Yes.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, again, remember that.
Plates? Sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Again, remember. While Mr. Malami is talking, hopefully we're listening. I'll get plates and napkins in a second. Thank you so much for journeying to go get that pizza and breadsticks and everything. Give them a round of applause. Thank you. We are looking at the FRQ right now that you wrote. So, yeah, if you could pass those out, that would be amazing. Let's run through real quick.
Dude, it's still alive.
What was that?
A fly.
Oh.
I got it.
I thought it was like a rat.
Wait, are you taking this?
I didn't actually. Can I get it? I'll eat it first.
Legs.
Right, I think it really just got that like. He did say something.
What was the
I annihilated. Oh wait, now we have plates right now. And you can count this one slice of pepperoni. You can do the designated servant.
Right.
Oh.
I'm not worried about that.
Victoria,
Oh, are you worried
you
about
can
this
make it
one?
easier. Can you put 2 over?
It's tomorrow.
Oh, no.
Mr. Maloney, makes you feel better?
Thank you very much.
I didn't even know what the Constitution was last week.
Oh.
And I think I passed it.
Yeah, okay, remember how we're like, we're gonna fail, and we're being dead serious? I think we passed like with 5 colors. Sorry about that. 5 colors? 5 colors. I was like, with 5 colors.
So as people are getting some snacks, okay, if you're talking about something other than listening to Mr. Malumbi, that wouldn't be good. Can I have somebody, for those who just arrived, who have their example in front of them, share what the independent variable was? Very good. Mental image, okay? Whether it's the students being told to form a mental image or just mental imagery in general. What was the control group? Group B, okay? So I want you to look right now at your example and see if that's what you put. Again, remember that we're here for review. Thirdly, research design. How did we put research design? Has to show cause and effect. Has to show cause and effect. Or manipulating one variable to affect another variable. Okay? And then number 4, different standard deviations. We were explaining that the standard deviation of group B is higher than group A. So the scores in group B were more different from each other than those in group A. Okay? For example, when Mr. Malumbi runs the averages for each of your tests, what would be a more valid test? If the scores were more lumped together, or if the scores were more diversified and you had some at the bottom and some at the top?
It doesn't matter.
Wait,
That would mean
validity?
if it was all clumped together, it'd be reliable.
Oh,
But
he's
it wouldn't
right.
be valid.
Okay.
Or it wouldn't have to be valid.
Okay.
It's like a valid test could be clumped together or it could be spread out. That just means it tests what it needs to test. Now, whether you taught the material well and have everyone come together, that's different.
Mm-hmm.
Because that just means the test is reliable if you clump all your scores together.
Guys, Jack's gonna get a 5.
Genius over here.
Yeah, I'm not rewriting.
So Mr. Maloney has created a seating chart. Let's see who Mr. Maloney likes and put next to Jack. You know, all the kids that need to do really well, I put next to Jack. No, I'm just kidding. That's actually against AP policy. You did not hear that, AP, even though they're listening right now. So when it comes to the points on the standard deviation, somebody explain to me how the points are different when it comes to the standard deviation of group A versus the standard deviation of group B. How is it different? Anthony.
Group A has a better average, while Group B doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Group A shows more kind of like a consistency between everyone's scores, and Group B does not. It shows people's scores are more inconsistent and spread out.
Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That, you know, for example, the standard deviation, let's say that it was right here, -4, 4, okay, -8, +8, okay? That's what the standard deviation point is, okay? That the scores are considered right here versus the other one, okay, that has a standard deviation of where it's 6. So this is the, okay, 6, 6, 12, 12, okay? Do you guys now see how much more spread out the scores are? Okay, oops. Okay, versus this one right here. And again, remember, what is this middle number called? Okay, what is the middle number? Okay, we use the mean right here, okay, which is the average. Okay, again, remember, what do you mean? What is the average, right? We went over this in class. If you don't get these three, these are really important to remember, okay? Mode means most common number. With these research questions, they use a lot of this terminology. If you don't get this terminology, this is something easy that you need to get, okay? Mean, mode, median. Median is that middle number, right? And we talked about in class how 22.5, if that outlier kind of skewed things, right? So there's going to be a bigger standard deviation right here because of that, okay? So the average right here is going to be that mean, okay? And scores on either side of it. So whenever I run my test, let's say that the average was, typically a test average will be, a good test will be 75%, right? Let's say if there was 100 questions, 75 questions is the average, okay? If it was standard deviation of 4, then that would be 71 right here. That would be 79 right here. That would be, over here would be 63. Over here would be 87%, okay? If that's the standard deviation was 4, okay? So that's what that's referring to. So group A was better than group B because group B had more spread out, okay, standard deviation points.
Oh. Okay, so then the average for both, no, because that makes sense, that last part makes sense. I was just gonna ask, since it's really 2 standard deviation graphs, is the average for both of them different then? Because I know that group B is spread out because some people got it and some people didn't because there was no mental imagery. And then would their average be lower? So if it's further away?
The mean average was different. Group A's was 25 and group B's was 10.
Oh, sorry, that's definitely not.
So the mean definitely was different for both of those. Okay, this is just if I was doing it for one of the tests that we've taken. Okay, because the average or the mean, what do you mean? Oh, it's the average. Okay, that's that. Going back to question, the ethical flaw. We didn't quite solidify on ethical flaw. If you put the researcher needed to guarantee that no harm would come to the students in this study, is that a good statement for an ethical flaw? No harm would come to the students.
Not really, because it's the one that's clear, explicitly in the thing, right?
Yeah, explicitly presented, right? So examples that would have been good are participants should be voluntary, okay? Or the researcher failed to obtain informed consent, right? Those would have been 2 good ones. Yes?
Are you recording?
We are,
Okay, good.
which is kind of awkward. Because I've been saying illegal stuff on this recording and hey, everybody sit around Anthony type of thing. I've already created the seating chart. I've already submitted it. I made sure that you are not sitting next to your friend because that's unethical. I'm sorry.
Wait, that's you have to submit a seating chart?
Yes. And Riley and Bella are not sitting next to each other. Berlin and Cami are not sitting next to each other. I'm so sorry. But it's to keep you focused in your own thing. So if you notice the seating chart, you might chuckle a little bit. Because maybe you are friends with somebody and like Mr. Moy didn't know it, you know? So, yeah. I tried to be as random as I could. All right. Let's look the next one. Yes.
So the ethical part, what I put was, I put two things. Was that
Okay, let's listen to Anthony, the ethical part. Phones away,
I didn't
please.
put any of the examples. The one that I put is that it's unethical because they were given a reward for the experiment.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, so there's an incentive to try and do well. So it's like it's skewed a little bit.
But how is that unethical?
How are they gonna reward?
It says here that
So we're asking, was there a reward?
and required them to complete the task as part of their coursework.
That's not a reward. That's just
It's-
like they have to do it.
I mean, if a teacher tells you you're doing this for an assignment or else your grades are gonna get docked, you're gonna do it, right?
Yeah, but that's not a reward. They just
It's considered a reward if it's psychological.
I mean, maybe it's a token in that, like, you're actually receiving something.
If they said it was graded, I can see that, but like.
But it's not like a voluntary behavior that was given a reward for reinforcement behavior. It was just something they had to do.
Yeah,
So-
you do it to get a good grade.
This might be an example, ladies and gentlemen, this might be an example of not being a hero. Don't try to look at the super, like, don't try to impress the readers with, like, oh, I figured out this thing that, like, nobody else is going to figure out. Okay?
I'm so smart.
Instead, if you were writing an essay, that would be one thing. Ladies and gentlemen, these questions should be somewhat black and white. If you're writing for a push, that's where you give a little bit of flair and you hope that you get that nuance point and everything. There's not as much nuance with these questions, okay? So that's a great point
They're
there.
grading off a thing that tells them like the answer, right? So if they're not super like
Yeah.
open-minded, they'll just be like,
No,
You're
no,
done.
no.
Yeah, yeah.
So I should
Alright.
expect a ton of trick questions in the FRQ.
you're gonna be like,
And it's psychology though.
And there's like
but is that, do you make that?
What?
Do you make the FRQ?
No.
So is it like.
That last FRQ, or a couple ago, where it was like, choose one of the other research methods, I added
I
that.
know, you put that on the board.
Yeah. But correct. Every single thing that we've been doing is from past, okay? Except for the quizzes, the reading quizzes.
Which is what I do the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are my worst grades.
You'll do better next year. I mean, I'll do better next year. Next question that we have is explain how the primacy effect would apply to this research. Can someone with a hand remind me, what is the primacy effect? Somebody remind me, primacy effect. Bea, primacy effect.
The tendency to remember like the first things on the list rather than what's in the middle or like the last.
Okay, and what is the last called? Recency, because it's the last thing that you just heard. That's recency. Primacy comes first. Okay, it's primary, comes first. So if you put, okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you put this, let's see if this would have worked. If students, tell me if this is true. If students remember more words at the beginning of the list than they have demonstrated the primacy effect. If students remember more words at the beginning of the list than they have demonstrated the primacy effect.
That is so.
Yes, that is it.
Dang it.
I was trying to trick you. Okay, you're welcome. Versus a poor answer would have been the students remembered the words better if they studied them earlier. That wouldn't have worked. Or if you put the words at the end, that wouldn't have worked. So keep that in mind. That it doesn't have to do with studying them earlier. It has to do with the words at the beginning of the list. Okay, that's primacy effect. Okay. Next one that we have is explain how levels of processing are related to the research. Levels of processing. Would would this work? The students who had no instructions did worse because they used shallow processing.
Yes.
Would that have worked?
Yes.
Yes, it would have.
That's so smart.
You
Okay.
don't have to,
Can you repeat that?
no, Sam, you don't have to explain like the
Shallow
paragraph.
processing.
Do that, that's not.
Okay, Cammy asked a great question.
What are you playing?
Okay, if you're here playing video games, you don't get credit. Thank you. And if you're here asking about credit right now, you don't get credit. But if you're like Cammy, who asked, can you repeat that? Yes, you're here for the right reason. Thank you, Cammy. The student who had no instructions did worse because they used shallow processing. Does that answer levels of processing?
It does.
Yes, it does. Okay. What about this one? Students used mental imagery, which allowed them to process the words deeply. Does that one work? Yes, it does. Okay, here's a third example. The researcher was interested in examining how mental imagery helps people.
Wait, no, processing, right? This is the question about processing?
Correct.
So no.
It does not. Okay?
The second one that you said is using mental imagery led to deeper processing. Like count would still be okay.
Correct. What about this one? Mental imagery group used semantic encoding and did better.
I believe that's true. No, that was the term. Yes, it was. But I'm just trying to remember what it was. Wait, isn't it creating ties though between? I think that's what semantic was. No, it's still a
Oh yeah, it's like word ties, I believe, like semantics.
But is that what's being used here?
No, it's image ties, so it wouldn't work.
Correct.
Wait, hold on.
Semantics is like wordplay, so it would be creating word ties to remember things, so it wouldn't work.
Wait, Mr. Lumby,
Uh-huh.
why was it? I can see why. Wait, number 3. What was the?
Yeah. It would kind of make sense from your perspective.
The type of research design? That one was cause and effect relationship in an experiment. That is good because, again, if we're just trying to correlate one thing to another, that doesn't necessarily show the causation. But in a research itself, if you can show cause and effect relationship, then that's best for an experiment. And that's why experiments are so good. We have different types of experiments that we can do. Okay, remind me, what are the different types of experiments?
Longitudinal, right? Question mark?
That's a study.
Yes? Oh, you're right.
But is that a concerned experiment?
Okay, what are
Observational.
okay, one of them is observational. Good.
Survey.
Oh my gosh, you guys are so right, and I'm just like.
What else?
She said longitudinal.
It's observational, experimental.
Case study.
Do you ever say
Okay,
that's
case
a
study. Good.
longitudinal?
Wasn't there a
Case
sectional like
study.
Is the experimental one?
Cross-sectional, like comparing two.
Yes.
Like experimental.
We're talking about the big research methodology.
Correlation.
Which chapter this?
Correlation, it's chapter 2.
Thank you.
Correlation. Okay.
Is it not cross-sectional?
What's the one?
No, that's within.
That's too specific.
Within what?
What's the name for the experimental one?
Case study we have. Good.
There's one that's like it's not experimental, but it is.
Um,
What's the name for the experimental one? Where they
well,
do the test?
longitudinal versus cross-sectional,
Yeah.
those are within developmental research designs.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, isn't case study also?
I'm gonna get this mixed up.
So we have naturalistic observation.
Oh, right, where you don't tell someone.
You don't do anything,
You just observe. Okay.
Okay.
You have the case studies. You have the surveys.
said that.
Okay.
Good
Good.
job. Mom literally said okay. That's such a hard answer.
And you also have interviews.
Oh,
I forgot about
yeah,
that.
that's kind of a basic one.
I saw that like, dude.
Okay. Now, which one of these is
Where's the one where you test it with the plug and mold? In a concealed environment. Because that's not.
research design? Okay. Or experimental. There you go. Yeah. Very good.
So what is this?
I said experimental like 15 times. Oh gosh, he didn't hear you. I know. So I almost said experimental.
Okay. Which one of these is like more sure? Yes.
What is this a list of?
Experiments? No,
This
experimental is one of
this
the
is a
options.
list of
Experimental experiment.
research methods.
So is it cross-sectional?
No, it falls under one of those categories.
Which category?
Probably one of those. It's like
Probably the one that it falls under.
Okay. So research method.
So isn't a research method also like cross-sectional? Like research?
it's probably one of those. It won't be on the-
Cross-sectional is within
It's like two different groups.
um,
Like a group, like an ethnic group or a cultural group or a social.
developmental research designs. So that's within that. You have cross-sectional design, which is researchers compare several groups to another based on variables such as age.
Isn't that a research method? That's how you're researching something.
Yeah, but Sylvia, I'm not really understand the difference between this and the other ones that you're talking about. Like are those just case studies, like the longitudinal and the
These are types of descriptive research,
Okay.
in a sense. Okay? Naturalistic observation, the advantage, and this is on page 40, is that participants act naturally.
Yeah.
The disadvantage is that its lack of interaction between experimenter and participants may lead to erroneous results. Okay, may be subject to experimental bias. Okay, just naturalistic observation. Case studies, the advantage is collection of in-depth, detailed information, opportunity to investigate unique illnesses, but the disadvantage is may be distorted by the expectations of the researcher. Okay, cannot be generalized to the population. So a case study or individual or group case study, that's an issue there. Surveys are quick and easy, gathers information about people's opinions and beliefs. Disadvantage is possible low response rate. Participants may be prone to demand characteristics and wording effects, right? So they might feel like they have to answer a certain way. Respondents may lie. Okay, so that's the disadvantage. Interviews, quick and easy, informational directly from the participants, but possibility of subjective self-reporting. Participants may lie, right? So that's why I'm trying to get to this idea of experimentation is the best one to go with if you can get people to limit confounding variables, as in like people acting naturally and such. That's why, like, for example, the Stanford Prism experiment, it was not a naturalistic observation, okay? If you were just studying a prison, you could do naturalistic observation, but this was an experiment which had the default of potentially people lying and not, confounding variables, but at the same time, it was a controlled environment, right?
Can a naturalistic observation be unethical? Because wouldn't that just be observing people's normal lives?
Yes, and maybe with reporting, if you had reporting that was like unethical, like you used participants' names,
Or like a privacy issue?
or sure, a privacy